Let me tell you a story, but not the kind you'd share around a campfire or whisper to a friend late at night. No. This story is about SCP-6771, also known as Man Who Can't See Milk. It's classified as Keter. That's SCP speak for a big, dangerous problem that's barely under control. And trust me, it lives up to the hype. SCP-6771 isn't a monster lurking in the dark, or a shape-shifting creature from your nightmares. It's just a man, a 27-year-old Canadian guy named Jeremy. Average height, average looks, good at sports, and, oh yeah, he can't see milk. Not doesn't drink it, not lactose intolerant, he cannot perceive its existence. Milk, in any liquid form, might as well be invisible. You could pour a gallon of the stuff on his head and he'd just ask why his hair's wet. Now, before you laugh, consider this. The SCP Foundation and the Canadian Dairy Commission, yes, that's a thing, have spent decades building an entire fake town just to keep this one man safe and to keep us safe from him. Welcome to Kamloops, British Columbia, or as the Foundation calls it, Area 04. Let's start with the basics. Jeremy lives in Kamloops, surrounded by a population of Foundation agents posing as townsfolk. Every shopkeeper, every coach, every chatty neighbor, they're all in on the secret. The operational dogma, an 8702-page manual, governs every aspect of this arrangement. And yes, the name sounds just as pretentious as the document is long. The rules are clear. Jeremy cannot encounter milk, ever. Every cow within a 50-mile radius has been genetically altered so they don't produce milk. Wide area Scranton filters are installed under every building to prevent anomalies like spilled milk from suddenly appearing near Jeremy. Even the food he eats has been rebranded. Cheese? Butter? Ice cream? Nope. They're all made from a fictional substance called goat suckle, which, according to Jeremy, comes from liver puree. Gross? Yes. Convincing? Surprisingly so. If milk somehow slips through the cracks, the fail-safes kick in. Jeremy's been implanted with artificial lacrimal glands that can release non-lethal tear gas into his system at the push of a button. The idea is to knock him out long enough for a hazmat team to clean up the mess. And if all else fails, the atmospheric terraformation machine surrounding Kamloops can whip up a storm complete with tornadoes to trap him inside the containment zone. Yeah, it's a lot of effort for one guy. But here's the kicker. Jeremy doesn't even know. To him, Kamloops is just a regular small town full of friendly faces and picture-perfect streets. He has no idea he's the reason the town exists. No idea that the only reason his life feels so normal is because a small army works around the clock to make it that way. Why go through all this trouble for a man who can't see milk? Well, it's not just a funny quirk. Jeremy's inability to perceive milk is enforced by an external force and anomaly, and anomalies don't like being ignored. Milk is a fundamental concept to the world we live in. Farmers milk cows. Babies drink milk. It's in your cereal, your coffee, your cheese pizza. For Jeremy, the very concept of milk is a blind spot in his mind. If you've ever tried to ignore a toothache or resist the urge to scratch a mosquito bite, you know what happens when you suppress something that demands attention. The anomaly pushes back. The operational dogma was created to stop that push. But here's the problem. It expires. On June 5th, 2062, the containment measures will end. And when that happens, Jeremy will either have to face the truth or be neutralized. The clock is ticking. So how did the Foundation find him? Funny you should ask. The story starts in Vancouver, where the Canadian Dairy Commission noticed something odd. People were reporting sightings of an unmilked cow roaming the city. Agents tracked the reports to St. Paul's maternity clinic, where they didn't find a cow. They found Jeremy, then an infant. Apparently, the anomaly made its presence known the moment he was born. There was a brief firefight with the hospital staff, because why not? And Jeremy was taken into custody. From there, the Foundation stepped in, working with the Dairy Commission to transfer him to Kamloops and create a life tailored to his anomaly. But it's not all controlled chaos. Jeremy, despite his bizarre affliction, has led what he thinks is a normal life. He's a sports coach, a community favorite, and unbeknownst to most, a serial killer. Yeah, you heard that right. Jeremy's pastime involves murdering drifters and strangers, carefully selected to avoid suspicion. The Foundation knows about his hobby, but as long as it keeps him occupied and out of trouble, they turn a blind eye. Dark, right? The Foundation's efforts to manage Jeremy's condition often veer into the absurd. For example, goat suckle. Who came up with that? Imagine explaining to a grown man that cheese comes from a puree of goat livers, and then getting him to believe it. It's almost funny until you remember why the lie is necessary. Then there are the atmospheric machines. Jeremy once joked about how Kamloops gets the weirdest storms, like tornadoes out of nowhere. Must be climate change, he quipped to a neighbor who, of course, was a Foundation agent barely suppressing a nervous laugh. The entire town is essentially a Truman Show gone horribly wrong. Every smile, every casual conversation, every game day at the sports center, it's all scripted. The agents aren't just actors, they're puppeteers, holding the strings of Jeremy's fragile world. But no system is perfect, and the cracks are starting to show. As the 2012 expiration date of certain containment measures approaches, the Foundation is on edge. Malfunctions in the atmospheric machines have led to erratic weather patterns. Scranton filters are glitching, and Jeremy has started noticing inconsistencies in the town's narrative. And then there's Lucretia Jones, Jeremy's romantic companion. She's not just his girlfriend. She's a Foundation agent assigned to monitor him closely. But lately, she's been struggling to keep her cover. The years of pretending have taken a toll, and Jeremy is beginning to sense that something's off. Her nervous smiles and awkward silences haven't gone unnoticed. It's not a question of if Jeremy will find out the truth, it's when. And when he does, the consequences could be catastrophic. The anomaly doesn't want to be ignored, and Jeremy is starting to pull at the threads of the illusion that holds his life together. The Foundation is running out of time. Jeremy is asking questions they can't answer, noticing things they can't explain. And somewhere deep in his mind, a single word is taking shape. A word that could unravel everything. Milk. Now you know the basics, but that's just the setup. What happens next is where things really get interesting. Because in the quaint little town of Kamloops, the illusion is about to break. And when it does, no one, not Jeremy, not the Foundation, not the townsfolk will escape unscathed. The town of Kamloops, British Columbia, was the picture of tranquility. Nestled amidst rolling hills and surrounded by the flowing Thompson River, its picturesque landscape masked secrets darker than its cloud-covered nights. For the residents, normalcy was carefully curated scripted interactions, controlled routines, and a shared duty to uphold the illusion. For one man, however, life was a riddle he couldn't solve. Jeremy sat in the cramped office of the MacArthur Island Sports Center, jotting down strategy notes for his amateur soccer team. At 27, he was every bit the energetic coach firm but fair, with a sharp eye for talent. His players loved him, parents trusted him, and he thrived in the rhythm of coaching. Yet Jeremy's life was governed by an invisible boundary, a condition he didn't even know he had. Jeremy couldn't perceive milk. To him, milk was a void, a blind spot in his vision and reality. It wasn't that he avoided it. It simply didn't exist to him. The Foundation and the Canadian Dairy Commission had orchestrated an elaborate containment system to maintain this blind spot. For decades, every aspect of Jeremy's life was tailored to prevent any encounter with liquid dairy. "Jeremy!" a voice called from the hallway. Lucretia Jones, his girlfriend, poked her head around the corner. Her auburn hair framed a face that always seemed on the verge of laughter, though her eyes betrayed a sharpness that never dulled. "Hey, Coach," she teased. "Don't forget we're meeting Uncle Jeff tonight. He's making his famous shepherd's pie." Jeremy grinned. Wouldn't miss it. Need to convince him to come to the big game this weekend. Lucretia nodded, her smile unwavering. He's bringing some new ingredients, she said carefully, testing the words. Gasluckin', I think he called it. Heard of it? Jeremy furrowed his brow. Gasluckin'? Sounds like one of those overpriced gourmet gimmicks. Lucretia shrugged, turning away to hide her unease. Gasluckin' was another fabricated explanation, a placeholder for dairy-based dishes. To Jeremy, shepherd's pie was made with goat suckle, an absurd but effective deception. Every resident of Kamloops knew the drill. The lie had to hold no matter what. Kamloops itself was transformed into a containment zone area 04 decades prior. Every building, every street, every person was part of the containment. Scranton filters installed beneath the town ensured no milk-based anomalies could form. No mammals lactated within a 50-mile radius. Atmospheric terraformation machines encircled the town, capable of conjuring localized tornadoes to prevent Jeremy's escape. On the surface, Kamloops was normal, maybe a little too normal. Beneath the veneer, tension simmered. The operational dogma, a sprawling 8702-page document, dictated every action, every interaction. For years, the system worked flawlessly. But as 2012 approached the year the containment would expire, cracks began to show. Jeremy arrived at his Uncle Jeff's house later that evening, his gear bag slung over his shoulder. The scent of roasted meat and spices greeted him as he entered the cozy dining room. Jeremy, my boy, Uncle Jeff greeted, his booming voice filling the room. Come in, sit down, you're gonna love this pie. Jeremy took his seat across from Lucretia, who was already sipping on a glass of wine. His uncle brought out the steaming dish, placing it ceremoniously on the table. What's the secret this time, Uncle? Jeremy asked, his stomach growling. Gasluckin', Uncle Jeff said, winking at Lucretia. Took me ages to get it just right. Jeremy served himself a hefty portion, digging in with gusto. As he chewed, he paused, something about the texture catching his attention. He frowned but quickly brushed the thought aside. Not bad, old man. Not bad at all. Uncle Jeff's laugh boomed again, but Lucretia's gaze lingered on Jeremy. For a moment, she seemed ready to speak but stopped herself. This was her job, to maintain the illusion, no matter how small the cracks grew. That night, Jeremy woke in a cold sweat. He sat up in bed, the remnants of a vivid dream clinging to his mind. It was a memory from his childhood running through a field of cows. But in the dream, the cows were bizarrely incomplete, their udders blurred, like a smudge on a photograph. He glanced over at Lucretia, her steady breathing grounding him. He leaned back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling. Gasluckin', he whispered to himself. The word felt strange, almost alien. A nagging thought wormed its way into his mind. What was he missing? Over the next week, Jeremy's unease grew. Little inconsistencies gnawed at him. A van unloading crates labeled lactose-free outside the Save-On Foods. Kids in the park arguing about something called milkshakes. And Lucretia's sudden, awkward silences whenever the topic of food came up. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching TV, Jeremy turned to her. Lucretia, can I ask you something? Of course, she replied, keeping her tone light. What's up with all this Gasluckin' stuff? It's everywhere all of a sudden. Feels off. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. It's just trendy, Jeremy. You know how these things catch on. He studied her face, searching for a crack in her composure. Finding none, he nodded, though his gut told him otherwise. The tipping point came at MacArthur Island, where Jeremy spent most of his days coaching and training. After practice, he wandered into the storage shed, looking for extra equipment. In the far corner, a crate caught his eye. The label read, "Do not open, hazardous material." Curiosity got the better of him. He pried it open, revealing cartons of an unfamiliar substance. The labels were faintly printed, the words swimming in his vision. He squinted, the symbols slipping through his grasp. His heart raced as an inexplicable dread settled over him. Unbeknownst to him, a silent alarm triggered. Across town, Lucretia's phone buzzed. She read the alert, her face paling. "He's seen it," she whispered. Jeremy couldn't shake the unease after the discovery in the storage shed. That strange label, "Do not open, hazardous material," seemed to whisper at the edges of his mind. Even stranger was the substance inside, its existence slipping from his perception as soon as he laid eyes on it. It wasn't fear or shock he felt. It was frustration, like a word stuck on the tip of his tongue. The next day, he returned to the shed. The crate was gone. In its place was a stack of soccer balls and cones, perfectly ordinary, but suspiciously neat. Jeremy leaned against the doorway, his thoughts spiraling. He glanced around the field, scanning the players and their parents. Everyone seemed off, too cheerful, too attentive. Lucretia waved from the bleachers, her ever-present smile plastered across her face. Jeremy raised a hand in acknowledgement but couldn't shake the feeling that she, like everyone else, was hiding something. Jeremy wasn't the only one feeling the tension. Across Kamloops, the Foundation agents disguised as townsfolk were scrambling. The incident at the storage shed had set off a chain of alarms. The containment team had been activated, and measures were underway to ensure Jeremy remained oblivious. At the center of the storm was Lucretia. Her role as Jeremy's romantic companion was both a privilege and a burden. She had been trained for years to maintain the illusion, but cracks were forming. "We need to handle this carefully," she said during a briefing in the town's underground command center. "If we push too hard, he'll break through the illusion." One of the technicians chimed in. "The Scranton filters are working overtime. If he focuses too much on the substance he saw, it could compromise the anomaly suppression field." Lucretia nodded, rubbing her temples. "Then we distract him. Ramp up the Gasluckin narrative. Make it a town obsession." Over the next week, Kamloops became a Gasluckin paradise. Posters adorned lampposts, advertising everything from Gasluckin burgers to Gasluckin-infused cocktails. The local diner introduced a Gasluckin pie that sold out within hours. Even the high school cafeteria jumped on the bandwagon, serving Gasluckin poutine to the students. Jeremy noticed the sudden craze but tried to dismiss it as another passing fad. Still, he couldn't ignore the growing number of people mentioning it in casual conversation. At the grocery store, a clerk handed him a sample of Gasluckin-flavored creamer. He frowned at the small packet, turning it over in his hand. "Try it in your coffee," the clerk said with a grin. "Game changer." Jeremy mumbled a polite decline, slipping the packet into his pocket as he walked away. Once outside, he ripped it open and stared at the powdered substance inside. Like the cartons in the shed, it seemed wrong. His brain refused to process what it was, the powder shifting out of focus. He crushed the packet in frustration, muttering under his breath, "What the hell is this stuff?" Jeremy wasn't the type to let things go. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table, a notebook in front of him. He began to list every strange occurrence he'd noticed over the past month. The disappearing crate, the Gasluckin craze, the strange conversations he overheard. Lucretia walked in, her footsteps light as a whisper. "What are you working on?" she asked, her tone casual. Jeremy quickly closed the notebook. "Just some game strategies." She tilted her head, her smile faltering for a moment. "You've been distant lately. Is something bothering you?" He hesitated, then decided to test the waters. "Do you ever feel like this town is weird? Like everyone's in on some big secret?" Lucretia froze for a fraction of a second before laughing. "That's small town life for you. Everyone knows everyone's business." Jeremy studied her face, searching for cracks in her facade. "Yeah, I guess." The breakthrough came 2 days later. Jeremy was cleaning out his gear bag when he found the crumpled sample packet from the grocery store. The powdered substance was still inside, untouched. He stared at it for a long moment. Before deciding to test it, he poured the powder into a glass of water, stirring it until it dissolved. The liquid turned opaque, its appearance flickering between two states, one his mind could perceive, and one that defied explanation. He lifted the glass, his heart pounding, and took a sip. The taste was indescribable, like something both foreign and familiar. His stomach churned, and a wave of nausea hit him. Jeremy stumbled to the sink, retching violently. When he looked down, the sink was empty, but he could feel something slick and cold on his lips, something he couldn't see. "Gas luckin'," he muttered, wiping his mouth. But deep down, he knew it wasn't gas luckin'. Whatever it wasn't meant for him. Jeremy's behavior didn't go unnoticed. Lucretia watched him closely, her concern growing with each passing day. During a Foundation meeting, she voiced her fears. "He's starting to put the pieces together," she said. "If he figures out what milk is, what it really is, he could destabilize." The room fell silent. One of the senior agents spoke. "The atmospheric terraformation machines are ready. If he tries to leave the containment zone, we'll create a storm big enough to block his path." "And if that doesn't work?" Lucretia asked. The agent's expression darkened. "We have the lacrimal gland failsafe." That night, Jeremy decided to confront his suspicions head-on. He drove to the grocery store, arriving just before closing time. The aisles were nearly empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He wandered to the dairy section, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he felt drawn to the refrigerated cases. As he approached, his vision blurred, and a searing headache gripped him. He stumbled, grabbing the edge of the case for support. His eyes landed on a carton, its label flickering in and out of focus. "What is this?" he whispered, reaching out to grab it. His fingers brushed the carton, and a surge of nausea overwhelmed him. He dropped it, the carton hitting the floor and bursting open. Liquid pooled around his feet, liquid he couldn't see. Jeremy staggered back, his breathing ragged. Somewhere in the distance, he heard alarms blaring. "Jeremy!" Lucretia's voice called from the entrance. She was running toward him, her face pale with panic. "You need to leave! Now!" He looked at her, his expression a mix of confusion and fear. "What's happening?" She grabbed his arm, pulling him away from the spill. "You weren't supposed to see that. We need to go." Jeremy sat in the passenger seat of Lucretia's car, his head spinning. The night air was thick with tension as they sped away from the grocery store. Lucretia gripped the wheel tightly, her knuckles white. For the first time, Jeremy saw something unfamiliar in her expression. Fear. "What the hell was that, Lucretia?" he demanded. His voice was sharp, his breathing uneven. "What was in that carton?" "Jeremy," she began, her voice trembling. "I need you to trust me, please. It's not safe for you to ask questions right now." "Not safe?" he snapped, glaring at her. "Not safe? I've lived in this town my whole life, and suddenly I feel like I'm the only one who doesn't know what's going on." Lucretia kept her eyes on the road, her silence infuriating. Jeremy slammed his fist against the dashboard. "Say something! Anything!" Finally, she spoke, her words deliberate. "There are things you don't understand, Jeremy. Things you're better off not knowing. For your safety, for everyone's safety. You need to let this go." Back in the command center beneath Kamloops, the containment team was in chaos. Alarms blared, red lights flashing as technicians scrambled to assess the situation. The senior agent, a grizzled man named O'Hara, barked orders. "How did this happen?" he demanded, slamming his hand on the table. "How did SCP-6771 come into contact with liquid dairy?" A younger agent hesitated before answering. "It seems the Scranton filters in the grocery store malfunctioned. The carton wasn't properly obscured." O'Hara's face darkened. "We're running out of time. The operational dogma only holds if the illusion is intact. If SCP-6771 connects the dots." He didn't finish the thought. Everyone in the room knew what was at stake. At home, Jeremy paced the living room, his mind racing. Lucretia sat on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She watched him with a mix of pity and unease, knowing that every word she spoke could unravel years of carefully crafted deception. "Gasluckin'," Jeremy said, suddenly turning to her. "It's not real, is it?" Lucretia's breath caught, but she didn't answer. "Don't lie to me, Lucretia," he shouted, his voice breaking. "I've been feeling it for weeks now. Something's wrong with this town. The people, the food, everything." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she held firm. "Jeremy, you're not well. You need to calm down." He laughed bitterly, running a hand through his hair. "Calm down? That's rich. Everyone's in on this, aren't they? My uncle, the kids I coach, the guy at the grocery store. Hell, probably the mayor, too." "You're being paranoid," she said softly. Jeremy shook his head, his voice trembling. "Paranoid? No, I'm finally waking up." The following morning, Jeremy skipped practice. He couldn't bring himself to face the smiling faces and forced small talk. Instead, he drove aimlessly around town, observing the place he had always called home with new eyes. Everywhere he looked, the town felt too perfect. The streets were spotless, the lawns meticulously trimmed, the storefronts uniformly inviting. It was like living in a snow globe, beautiful, but artificial. His wandering brought him to MacArthur Island. He parked his car and stepped out, the early morning mist clinging to the air. As he walked the empty fields, he noticed something unusual. Near the edge of the skate park, a group of workers was dismantling a large metal structure. Jeremy approached, his curiosity piqued. "What's going on here?" he called out. One of the workers froze, his eyes darting nervously. Another quickly stepped forward, smiling too broadly. "Just some routine maintenance," he said. "Nothing to worry about." Jeremy narrowed his eyes. "Since when do routine maintenance crews show up at dawn?" the man stammered. But before he could respond, a voice crackled through his radio. "Code Yellow, SCP-6771 present." The workers hurriedly packed up their tools, avoiding Jeremy's gaze as they climbed into their truck and drove off. Jeremy watched them go, a sinking feeling in his stomach. That evening, Jeremy confronted Uncle Jeff. He stormed into the older man's house without knocking, his eyes wild. "You need to tell me what's going on," Jeremy demanded. "I'm done with the lies." Uncle Jeff, who had been pouring himself a glass of whiskey, raised an eyebrow. "Jeremy, what's this about?" "Don't play dumb with me!" Jeremy shouted. "The gasluckin', the crates, the workers at the park, all of it! What are you hiding?" Uncle Jeff sighed heavily, setting down his glass. "You've been under a lot of stress lately, son. Maybe you should take a break, get some rest." Jeremy clenched his fists. "Don't patronize me. You think I haven't noticed how everyone acts around me? Like they're walking on eggshells?" Jeff's eyes darkened. "Jeremy, you don't know what you're saying." "Then explain it to me!" Jeremy's voice cracked, desperation seeping through his anger. "What aren't you telling me?" For a moment, Jeff seemed to consider it. Then his expression hardened. "You don't want to know." As the days passed, Jeremy's paranoia grew. The town's perfect facade seemed to mock him. Every cheerful smile and polite exchange a reminder of the secrets he wasn't privy to. He began avoiding people, spending hours alone in his house with the curtains drawn. Meanwhile, the containment team worked frantically to stabilize the situation. Lucretia was torn between her duties and her feelings for Jeremy. She knew she was supposed to be an agent first and a companion second, but seeing him unravel was more painful than she had anticipated. During another meeting in the command center, O'Hara delivered a grim update. SCP-6771 is on the verge of breaching containment. If we don't act soon, the entire operation could collapse. "What about the lacrimal glands?" a technician asked. O'Hara shook his head. "Not yet, it's a last resort." The breaking point came on a rainy night. Jeremy sat at his kitchen table, staring at the notebook he had filled with observations and theories. He flipped through the pages, his frustration mounting. None of it made sense. Then, like a puzzle piece clicking into place, a memory surfaced. The crate in the storage shed, the carton at the grocery store, the taste of the powder. They weren't separate events. They were connected. Jeremy's heart raced as he whispered the word that had haunted him for weeks. Milk. The word felt alien, wrong, like a glitch in his reality, but it was the only explanation that fit. Jeremy didn't know what milk was, but he knew it was something he wasn't supposed to see. Jeremy stood by the window, staring out at the rain-soaked streets of Kamloops. The word milk played over and over in his mind, a jagged shard of truth slicing through the carefully constructed illusion of his life. He felt like a stranger in his own town, the place he had called home his entire life, now brimming with deceit and hidden agendas. But even as Jeremy's thoughts spiraled, another darker part of his mind remained sharp and focused. This part thrived on control, on the calculated precision of his other life, the one no one talked about. As much as he wanted answers about the town's secrets, he couldn't afford to let them interfere with his routines. At midnight, Jeremy left his house, his steps deliberate. The rain had eased to a drizzle, muffling the sound of his boots on the pavement. He made his way to a small tool shed on the outskirts of MacArthur Island, unlocking the door and stepping inside. Inside, the shed was meticulously organized. Tools hung on hooks. Shelves were lined with jars of screws and nails, and in the corner stood a large chest freezer. Jeremy opened it, the cold mist spilling out and biting at his face. Inside were neatly wrapped packages, their contents carefully labeled in his precise handwriting. He selected one, unwrapping it to reveal a bloodied trophy, a token from one of his victims. Jeremy's double life as a beloved sports coach and a meticulous serial killer required a level of compartmentalization that even he sometimes marveled at. The kills weren't random. They were calculated acts of release, a way to control the chaos of his world. But tonight, his mind wasn't on the trophies or the kill. It was on milk. The word nagged at him, threading itself through every thought, every memory. Back in the command center, the containment team was reviewing footage from the surveillance cameras planted across Kamloops. Jeremy's midnight excursion hadn't gone unnoticed. "Look at him," O'Hara said, pointing to the screen where Jeremy was seen leaving the shed. "He's unraveling, but he's still following his patterns. That's the only thing keeping him stable." "Should we intervene?" a junior agent asked. "No," O'Hara replied firmly. "Not yet. We need to let him play out his routines while we prepare for the exit protocol. If we act now, we risk destabilizing him further." Lucretia, who had been silent during the briefing, finally spoke. "What happens if he figures it out before we're ready?" O'Hara's expression darkened. "Then we execute the lacrimal failsafe." Jeremy's first kill had been an accident, a moment of blind rage when he was 16 years old. A heated argument with a rival player during a hockey game had spilled into the locker room. One punch had turned into many, and by the time Jeremy stopped, the boy was lifeless on the floor. The town rallied around Jeremy, calling it a tragic accident, a freak misunderstanding. But Jeremy knew better. He had felt the rush, the clarity that came with taking control, and he craved it. Over the years, Jeremy's kills became more deliberate. He chose victims carefully, drifters, strangers passing through Kamloops, people who wouldn't be missed. The Foundation knew about his extracurricular activities, of course. His homicidal tendencies were meticulously documented in the operational dogma, classified as non-anomalous but relevant behavior. To the Foundation, Jeremy's kills were a necessary evil, a way to keep him occupied and distracted from the larger questions. But now, with his focus shifting to the truth about milk, even that carefully managed outlet was no longer enough. At practice the next day, Jeremy tried to go through the motions. The kids ran drills on the field, their laughter echoing in the crisp morning air. But Jeremy's focus wavered. He kept glancing at the parents gathered on the sidelines. their forced smiles and overly cheerful demeanor. He could feel their eyes on him, their scrutiny piercing through his usual facade. One of the players, a lanky teenager named Chris, jogged over to him. "Coach, you okay? You seem off." Jeremy forced a smile. "I'm fine, Chris. Just didn't sleep well." Chris nodded, but his expression betrayed concern. "You sure? You've been kinda weird lately. My mom said..." "Your mom said what?" Jeremy cut in, his voice sharper than intended. Chris hesitated, shrinking back. "Nothing, never mind." Jeremy watched the boy retreat, his fists clenching at his sides. The mask he had worn for so long was slipping, and he didn't know how to stop it. That evening, Lucretia found Jeremy sitting in the dark living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The television flickered, the sound muted. She hesitated in the doorway before stepping inside. "Jeremy," she began softly, "we need to talk." He didn't look at her. "You've been saying that a lot lately," she sighed, sitting down across from him. "I know you're feeling off, but you have to trust me. Everything we've done, everything I've done, it's all been to protect you." "Protect me from what?" he asked, finally meeting her gaze. His eyes were cold, distant. "The truth, or myself?" Lucretia leaned forward, her voice urgent. "You're not ready for the truth, Jeremy. You think you are, but you're not. If you push too hard, it'll destroy you." He laughed bitterly. "That's what you don't understand. I've already been destroyed, I just didn't know it until now." The next day, practice was canceled. Chris, the teenager who had questioned Jeremy, hadn't shown up. His parents were frantic, and a search party was organized. Jeremy joined the group, playing the role of the concerned coach, but his mind was elsewhere. As they combed the woods near MacArthur Island, Jeremy's thoughts drifted to his shed, to the trophies stored inside. He hadn't taken a trophy from Chris, not yet, but the boy's disappearance felt too coincidental. Jeremy found himself lingering at the edge of the search party, his hand tightening around the flashlight he carried. The line between his two lives was blurring, and he didn't know how much longer he could keep them separate. The search party reconvened at the park, their efforts fruitless. Chris's parents were inconsolable, their cries piercing the night air. Jeremy stood apart, his mind racing. Then a voice crackled over a police radio. "We found something. Near the skate park." Jeremy's heart pounded as he followed the others to the site. A group of officers was gathered around a patch of disturbed earth. One of them held up a piece of fabric, a bloodied scrap of Chris's jersey. Lucretia appeared at Jeremy's side, her face pale. "What did you do?" she whispered. Jeremy didn't answer. He couldn't. The truth was, he didn't remember. June 5th, 2012 dawned bright and cold, the sky over Kamloops an unnatural shade of blue. Jeremy awoke with a pounding headache and a gnawing sense of unease. It was his 50th birthday, a milestone he had been reminded of endlessly in the weeks leading up to the day. His players had hinted at a surprise celebration. Lucretia had been unusually affectionate, and Uncle Jeff had called twice to confirm his attendance. Despite the fanfare, something felt wrong. The day passed uneventfully until evening, when Lucretia insisted on driving him to the Save on Foods for what she described as a special birthday surprise. Jeremy, still disoriented by his mounting paranoia and fragmented memories of Chris's disappearance, reluctantly agreed. When they arrived, the store was empty except for a crowd of familiar faces. His players, their parents, his friends, and even strangers he only vaguely recognized, all standing in the brightly lit dairy aisle. Balloons hung from the ceiling, and a banner read, "Happy Birthday, Jeremy." "Surprise!" the crowd shouted in unison, their voices echoing off the sterile walls. Jeremy forced a smile. The scene felt staged, like a poorly rehearsed play. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Uncle Jeff, who stood beside a stack of cartons. Jeff's grin was wide, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Uncle Jeff," Jeremy said, his voice uneven, "what's all this?" "A celebration!" Jeff bellowed, clapping him on the shoulder. You've been such an inspiration to this town, Jeremy. We thought it was time you had something special. The crowd parted, revealing Lucretia holding a single carton. She stepped forward, her smile too bright. Jeremy, she said, her voice trembling slightly. This is for you. Jeremy stared at the carton in her hands. The label flickered in his vision, the letters blurring and reforming, never settling. He reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing the cold surface. The sensation sent a shiver down his spine. What is this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It's milk, Lucretia said, the word hanging in the air like a gunshot. Jeremy blinked, the word refusing to register. Milk? He repeated, his brow furrowing. I don't understand. The crowd laughed nervously, their expressions shifting between anticipation and unease. Uncle Jeff stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Jeremy's shoulder. Come on, Jeremy. Don't tell me you've never heard of milk. Jeremy's voice faltered. His gaze darted between the carton and the crowd. The world around him seemed to tilt, the walls closing in. Lucretia thrust the carton closer to him, her tone sharp. Say it, Jeremy. Say the word. I don't know what this is, he stammered, his hands trembling. Sweat beaded on his forehead as his vision blurred. The word felt foreign, like a splinter lodged in his brain. The laughter grew louder, more frantic. Uncle Jeff's grin twisted into something cruel. It's milk, boy. The thing you've never seen. The thing we've hidden from you. Jeremy staggered back, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Stop it, he muttered, clutching his head. Stop it! But they didn't stop. The crowd closed in, their laughter morphing into a cacophony of jeers. Lucretia shoved the carton into his hands, her eyes alight with something unrecognizable. Look at it, Jeremy. Look. Jeremy's knees buckled as he fell to the floor. The carton burst open, its contents spilling onto the tile. The liquid spread in a puddle around him, cold and invisible. His mind rebelled against the sight, the edges of his perception fraying like an old photograph. Jeremy! Lucretia shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at the puddle. It's real! Milk is real! No! Jeremy screamed, the sound raw and guttural. His vision flickered, the world around him fragmenting. The floor seemed to ripple beneath him as the anomaly that defined his existence began to unravel. Uncle Jeff loomed over him, his expression dark. You've been blind your whole life, boy. It's time you saw the truth. The crowd surged forward, pinning Jeremy to the ground. He struggled violently, but their combined weight held him down. Someone produced a funnel, shoving it into his mouth as others poured the liquid into it. Jeremy gagged, his body convulsing as the milk hit his throat. He couldn't see it, but he felt its presence, a cold, cloying force invading his senses. His mind fractured, memories and perceptions colliding in a storm of confusion and pain. Hold him down, Uncle Jeff shouted, his voice nearly drowned out by the chaos. The crowd was relentless, their hands gripping Jeremy's arms and legs as they forced him to consume the liquid. Jeremy's screams turned to gurgles, his eyes rolling back. Sweat and tears mingled on his face as he thrashed against the onslaught. His mind, unable to reconcile the existence of milk, began to collapse under the weight of the revelation. 30 minutes later, the aisle was silent. The crowd had dispersed, leaving Jeremy's motionless body on the floor. His skin was pale, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The puddle of milk around him seemed to shimmer, reflecting the fluorescent lights above. Lucretia knelt beside him, her face streaked with tears. I'm sorry, she whispered, brushing a damp strand of hair from his forehead. I didn't want it to end like this. Uncle Jeff stood nearby, his expression unreadable. It had to be done, he said gruffly. The operational dogma doesn't leave room for sentiment. Lucretia shot him a glare but didn't argue. The truth was, Jeremy was no longer the man they had known. His mind was broken, shattered beyond repair. Kamloops awoke the next morning to a new reality. The storm that had been brewing for decades, the carefully constructed illusion that held the town together, had finally broken. Jeremy, the man who had lived at the center of it all, was now a hollow shell of his former self. Jeremy lay on a cot in an isolated room beneath the Save-On Foods, his breathing shallow and uneven. The walls were padded, the air sterile. Monitors beeped steadily, tracking his vitals, while a team of Foundation agents observed from behind a one-way mirror. He's stable, but his cognitive functions are severely impaired, one of the technicians reported. The introduction of milk triggered a catastrophic breakdown. His brain is barely holding together. Lucretia stood at the back of the observation room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She couldn't bring herself to look at Jeremy. The man she had spent years pretending to love was gone, replaced by a fragile husk. O'Hara entered the room, his presence commanding. "Is he responsive?" he asked curtly. "Barely," the technician replied. "He mutters occasionally, but it's incoherent." O'Hara nodded, his expression grim. "Prepare the neutralization protocol. It's time to put this to rest." Above ground, Kamloops had already begun its transformation. Residents flooded the grocery store, eagerly buying milk for the first time in decades. The shelves, once stocked with fabricated alternatives, now brimmed with cartons and bottles. People drank with exaggerated enthusiasm, laughing and toasting as if to mock the years of deception. The atmosphere was jubilant, but it carried an undercurrent of something darker, a collective exhalation of relief, tinged with cruelty. The town was free from the constraints of the operational dogma, but the cost of that freedom was Jeremy's sanity. Uncle Jeff watched the celebrations from his porch, a glass of milk in hand. He raised it in a mock toast to the horizon. "Here's to you, Jeremy," he muttered. "You served your purpose." Lucretia couldn't stay away. That evening she entered Jeremy's room, the faint smell of antiseptic stinging her nose. He lay motionless, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. His lips moved faintly, as if whispering to someone only he could see. "Jeremy," she said softly, sitting beside him. "Can you hear me?" For a moment there was no response. Then his eyes shifted, focusing on her with unsettling clarity. "Milk," he croaked, the word rasping from his throat like a curse. Tears welled in Lucretia's eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want it to end like this." Jeremy's face twisted, a flicker of rage breaking through the haze. "You lied," he hissed. "All of you. You lied." She reached out to touch his hand, but he recoiled, his body trembling. "It was for your safety," she pleaded. "You weren't supposed to know. We tried to protect you." His laugh was hollow, a bitter sound that echoed through the sterile room. "Protect me? You destroyed me." The next morning, the neutralization protocol was enacted. Jeremy was sedated and moved to a secure facility on the outskirts of Kamloops. The room was cold and featureless, lit only by a single overhead bulb. O'Hara stood by as the technicians prepared the equipment. "This is the only way," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Jeremy was strapped to a chair, his head lolling to one side. His muttering had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Lucretia stood in the corner, her face pale and expressionless. "Begin," O'Hara ordered. A machine hummed to life, emitting a low, resonant tone. It was a device designed specifically for Jeremy, a neural scrambler, calibrated to shut down the anomaly that had defined his existence. As the hum grew louder, Jeremy's body tensed, his eyes widening in fear. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Don't." The technicians hesitated, their hands hovering over the controls, but O'Hara's glare was unyielding. "Do it." The machine pulsed, and Jeremy's body convulsed. His screams were brief, cut off as his mind fractured one final time. The room fell silent, the machine powering down. Jeremy slumped in the chair, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. "Is it done?" O'Hara asked. The lead technician checked the monitors and nodded. "The anomaly is neutralized. SCP-6771 is no longer a threat." O'Hara turned to Lucretia, his expression unreadable. "You did your job, it's over." But Lucretia didn't respond. She stared at Jeremy's lifeless form, her guilt and grief threatening to consume her. A week later, Kamloops had fully embraced its new reality. Milk was everywhere, on billboards, in cafes, even in the town's slogans. The residents drank it with gusto, their exaggerated enthusiasm masking the unease that lingered beneath the surface. Jeremy's house was emptied, his belongings quietly disposed of. The shed on MacArthur Island was dismantled, its contents incinerated. To the town, he was a ghost, a forgotten relic of a containment protocol that no longer mattered. But Lucretia couldn't forget. She left Kamloops shortly after the neutralization, unable to reconcile her role in Jeremy's downfall. The memory of his broken voice haunted her dreams, a reminder of the cost of containment. In a secure file buried deep within the Foundation's archives, Jeremy's case was marked as neutralized. His name was never mentioned again, and the operational dogma was quietly retired. But in the quiet hours of the night, in the empty aisles of the Save-On Foods, some claimed they could still hear whispers, faint, broken words carried on the cold air. "Milk?" Now that Jeremy's tragic story has unfolded, it's time to dive deeper into SCP-6771's peculiarities, containment, and the fan theories swirling around this milkless anomaly. Because let's face it, no SCP is complete without a healthy dose of speculation from the community. At its core, SCP-6771 isn't just about milk. It's about the concept of perception and reality. Jeremy's inability to perceive liquid dairy raises unsettling questions. Is it a neurological quirk amplified by the anomaly, or is there something deeper at play? Some fans theorize that Jeremy's blindness to milk is a side effect of a larger reality warping force, one that's just barely held in check by the containment procedures. The operational dogma refers to an external party enforcing Jeremy's condition. But what or who is this party? One popular theory suggests that the anomaly is sentient, punishing Jeremy for reasons unknown. The fact that milk itself, a universally recognized symbol of nourishment and comfort, is the target feels almost poetic in its cruelty. Milk, in this context, isn't just a beverage. It's a manifestation of the anomaly's power. It's both a blind spot and a weapon. A concept so fundamental to the human experience that its absence creates a ripple effect through Jeremy's perception. Fans have noted the dark humor in how the Foundation bends over backward to make milk irrelevant, only to have it remain the central force driving the entire story. Could Jeremy's inability to perceive milk extend to other foundational concepts if left unchecked? What if the anomaly expands, rendering him blind to water, sunlight, or even time? The implications are chilling and open the door to a broader exploration of the anomaly's potential. SCP-6771 highlights the ethical gray zones the Foundation operates within. For decades, an entire town was repurposed, its residents conscripted into maintaining Jeremy's illusion. The lengths to which the Foundation goes altering animals, terraforming weather, and planting false narratives raise uncomfortable questions. Was there truly no better solution? Did the Foundation choose the containment method for efficiency? Or was it simply easier to manipulate Jeremy's life, rather than confront the anomaly head-on? Fans have debated whether the Foundation's decision to allow Jeremy's serial killing spree reflects pragmatism or cold indifference. After all, as long as Jeremy stayed distracted, the anomaly remained stable. One of the most intriguing elements of SCP-6771 is the expiration date of the operational dogma, June 5, 2062. Why does the containment end at this precise moment? Some theorists suggest that the anomaly's power is tied to Jeremy's lifespan, with the expiration date marking the point where its influence naturally fades. Others believe the Foundation anticipates a catastrophic breach and has simply delayed the inevitable. The planned exit procedure, involving the staged revelation of milk, is another point of contention. Was it designed to neutralize the anomaly through forced confrontation, or was it a sadistic final act of control? The brutal nature of Jeremy's neutralization leaves little doubt about the Foundation's priorities containment at all costs. Regardless of the human toll, Lucretia is one of the most discussed characters among SCP-6771 enthusiasts. Her dual role as Jeremy's companion and a Foundation agent highlights the personal sacrifices made by those involved in containment. Fans have speculated about her true feelings for Jeremy. Was her affection genuine, or was it another layer of her cover? Her emotional struggle during the neutralization scene adds complexity to her character. Some interpret her actions as a betrayal, while others see her as a tragic figure trapped between duty and empathy. Either way, Lucretia embodies the moral ambiguity that defines the Foundation's operations. Some fans believe the anomaly is a sentient force punishing Jeremy for an unknown offense. They point to the poetic irony of milk, a symbol of care and sustenance, becoming the object of his torment. Another theory posits that Jeremy isn't the victim, but the source of the anomaly. His presence distorts reality, making milk impossible to perceive within his vicinity. This would explain the extreme measures required to isolate him. SCP-6771 could be a symptom of a larger problem, a glitch in the fabric of reality. The anomaly's behavior resembles a corrupted file in a simulation, with milk becoming the missing data in Jeremy's world. Some fans argue that the operational dogma isn't about containment at all, but a long-term experiment. By manipulating Jeremy's perception, the Foundation may be studying the effects of erasing fundamental concepts from human cognition. SCP-6771 stands out in the SCP universe for its blend of absurdity and horror. The idea of a man who can't see milk might sound ridiculous on paper, but the story's execution transforms it into a chilling exploration of control, perception, and the fragility of reality. The anomaly itself is almost secondary to the human cost of containment. Jeremy's life is a carefully constructed lie, his identity shaped entirely by forces beyond his control. The Foundation's willingness to manipulate an entire town for the sake of containment underscores the terrifying lengths they will go to maintain order. In many ways, SCP-6771 is less about milk and more about the illusion of normalcy. The town of Kamloops represents a microcosm of the Foundation's ethos, a shiny surface masking the cracks of an unspeakable truth. SCP-6771 is a masterclass in blending the absurd with the macabre. It's a story that makes you laugh at the concept of goat suckle while simultaneously sending a chill down your spine. Jeremy's descent into madness, the town's complicity, and the Foundation's cold pragmatism create a narrative that lingers long after the final scene. As you sip your coffee or pour milk into your cereal tomorrow morning, take a moment to consider, what if you couldn't see it? What if something as basic as milk could fracture your reality? SCP-6771 reminds us that the most mundane things can hold the most terrifying secrets. And sometimes the greatest horrors are the ones hiding in plain sight.